Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. As we begin, something about the early part of this course is worth mentioning. The first two modules, identity and values, may seem simple on the surface, but they are actually some of the most foundational ideas of the entire unlock journey. They shape how we understand ourselves. They shape how we make decisions. They shape how we view our relationships, and they shape how we show up in life. Because of that, today's time together will slow down just a little and deepen these ideas. Originally, the questions included modules 1 through 3, but after reflecting on the first cohort meeting and the way people usually process these ideas, something became clear. When identity and values are understood first, the emotional tools in module 3 began to make much more sense. So today we'll focus on the most important questions that usually arise from modules 1 and 2. And as I was reflecting on everything we've covered in level 1, I kept coming back to one simple idea. Awareness creates space. Space to notice what we do, space to notice who we are, and space to see who we are becoming. When we began this journey, many of us were focused on what we were doing, our reactions, our emotions, our habits. Then we began exploring something deeper, who we are, what matters to us, what we value, our gifts or our natural abilities, what is true about us. And as we continued moving forward, we started looking toward who we are becoming, the direction we are moving, the life we are creating, the person we're choosing to become. In many ways, that's the journey of level 1's flourishing self. You may notice that level 1 begins with identity and values. Even though this framework is often described as notice what we do, who we are, see who we are becoming. This is intentional because in real life, these three things are constantly influencing one another. Sometimes awareness helps us notice what we do. Sometimes awareness helps us know who we are. Sometimes awareness helps us see who we are becoming. And often one leads naturally to the others. For example, I know I value patience. Then I notice how impatient I become in a different moment. That awareness helps me understand myself more deeply, and it helps me see the kind of person I am becoming if I continue that pattern. All three are happening together. Identity and values do not eliminate the need for awareness. They give awareness meaning. And awareness helps us live more intentionally from what we know to be true. That's why level 1 begins with identity and values, not because they come first in every situation, but because they provide a foundation for understanding everything else. As you look at these three areas, what we do, who we are, and who we are becoming, which one has been most meaningful for you during this journey? Let's briefly revisit the structure of what you've been learning. Module 1 asks a powerful question. Who am I really? Not who others expect you to be, not who you feel pressure to become, but who you are at your core, your worth, your gifts, your identity as a person created with dignity and purpose. Module 2 then asks the next question. What matters most to me? This is where we begin identifying our values, the beliefs and priorities that guide how we live and make decisions. Together, these ideas create something powerful. Identity gives us stability. Values give us direction. When both become clearer, people often begin experiencing life differently. Decisions feel clearer, relationships feel healthier, and life begins to feel more aligned. So let's begin with one of the most important questions that comes from Module 1. What does it mean that our worth is not earned? Many people hear the idea that worth is inherent and think, that sounds good, but what does that really mean? Most of us grow up absorbing subtle messages about what gives a person value. Sometimes worth becomes tied to performance, how productive we are, or how successful we become. Other times it becomes tied to what we have, the career we hold, the income we earn, the home we live in, the lifestyle we appear to live. None of these things are inherently wrong. Work, success, and resources can be meaningful parts of life. But when they quietly become the measure of our worth, life becomes fragile. Our sense of value rises and falls with circumstances and comparison. Module 1 invites us to consider something deeper, that worth is not created by what we achieve, earn, or possess. Our worth is inherent. It exists because of who we are. And when people begin living from that understanding rather than constantly trying to prove themselves, something important shifts. They still grow, they still pursue meaningful goals, but their value is no longer constantly on trial. Before we continue, pause for a moment and reflect. Think about the environment you've been part of: family, school, work, community. What messages did you receive about what makes a person valuable? Achievement, productivity, success, being dependable, being strong for others? Just notice what shaped the way you think about worth. Sometimes those messages were helpful. Sometimes they were incomplete. Module 1 invites us to gently question those assumptions and rediscover something deeper. Question 2. What is the difference between identity and roles? Many of us describe ourselves primarily by the roles we play: spouse or partner, parent, employee, leader. These roles are meaningful parts of life, but they are not the deepest layer of who we are. Roles describe what we do. Identity reflects who we are. When identity becomes too closely tied to roles, something difficult can happen. If a role changes, a career shift, children growing older, life circumstances evolving, people can suddenly feel lost. They may ask, who am I now? But when identity is deeper than roles, something steadier becomes possible. Roles may change, but identity remains. Question 3. Why does comparison affect us so strongly? Another pattern people often notice is comparison. We live in a world where it's easy to see what others appear to be doing. Social media, professional environments, and cultural expectations all create images of success and fulfillment. But comparison quietly shifts our focus away from our own path. Instead of asking, who am I becoming? We begin asking, how do I measure up? When that happens, we overlook something important: the uniqueness of our own design, our gifts, our experiences, our story. Different does not mean better or worse. It simply means different. Question 4. What if I feel like I've lost myself? This is actually one of the most common experiences people describe. Sometimes it happens gradually. Responsibilities grow, expectations increase. We focus on caring for others and keeping everything running. And slowly we stop asking questions like, what do I want? Or what gives me energy? Then one day a quiet thought appears: I'm not sure who I am anymore. If that thought has ever crossed your mind, it's important to know this, that that moment is not failure. Often it's the beginning of rediscovery. Question 5. What if I don't know what my gifts are? Many people feel this way. Gifts sometimes become hidden beneath responsibilities or comparison. A helpful place to begin is not asking, what am I supposed to be good at? But asking, what gives me energy? Or when do I feel curious? Or when do I feel most alive? Those moments often reveal clues about the gifts already present in you. Rediscovering gifts is usually less about inventing something new and more about remembering what was always there. Once we begin reconnecting with identity, the next question naturally follows. If I understand who I am, how do I live from that identity? This is where Module 2 introduces values. Values translate identity into everyday decisions. Question 6. What exactly are values? Values are deeply held beliefs about what matters most to us. They guide the way we want to live, the way we want to love, on the way we want to lead. A helpful way to think about values is to imagine a compass. A compass does not give you the entire map of life. It does not tell you every step to take, but it does point you in the direction you want to move. Values work the same way. They guide decisions. They shape boundaries. They influence how we respond when life becomes complicated. When people are living aligned with their values, they often feel a sense of coherence. Life feels more integrated. They may feel energized, focused, and grounded in what matters most. But when people drift away from the values, something else often happens. They may feel tension, exhaustion, frustration, sometimes even a vague sense that life feels off balance. Those feelings are not always negative. Often they are signals that something inside us is asking for attention. Question 7. Why do people sometimes live by other people's values? Another important realization many people have is that they may be living according to borrowed values. Our families may emphasize security. Our workplaces may emphasize achievement. Our culture may emphasize success, status, or appearance. None of these values are inherently wrong, but sometimes people adopt them without consciously choosing them. Over time, they may begin to feel something like this. My life looks successful on the outside, but something feels off. When people pause and reflect on their own values, they sometimes realize that the direction they have been moving does not fully reflect what matters most to them. Clarifying personal values helps people begin making decisions that align with their deeper convictions. Question 8. What happens when life drifts away from our values? When actions and values move in different directions, people often experience internal tension. This may show up as burnout, resentment, exhaustion, loss of meaning. Sometimes people describe it as feeling like they're living someone else's life. Recognizing that tension is not a failure. In many cases, actually a very important moment of clarity. It may be revealing that life needs adjustment. Not necessarily dramatic change, but small shifts. Small decisions that move life back toward alignment. And over time, those small shifts often create meaningful transformation. Question 9. What if two values conflict? This happens frequently. For example, someone may deeply value family and also deeply value professional contribution. Both are meaningful. Sometimes the question becomes, which value needs to guide this moment? Values don't eliminate difficult decisions, but they help us make them intentionally. Question 10. How do values connect to purpose? Purpose rarely appears as a sudden dramatic realization. More often, it grows from living our values consistently over time. When people repeatedly act from compassion, growth, service, or creativity, patterns begin to emerge. They begin to see the kinds of problems they care about, the people they feel drawn to help, the contributions that feel meaningful. Purpose often grows from those patterns. Let's step back and see how these ideas connect. Identity answers, who am I? Values answer, what matters most to me? When both become clearer, people begin living with greater intention. Next week, we'll explore emotional intelligence and self-regulation. Because even when we understand identity and values, life still brings pressure, emotions, and complex relationships. Module 3 introduces tools that help us respond to those moments with awareness rather than reaction. As you move through the coming week, notice 3 things. Where do you feel most aligned with who you are? Where do your choices reflect what matters most? And where might life be inviting you to reconnect with one of those things? You don't need to solve everything. Just notice. Awareness is often the first step toward meaningful change. Thank you for being here and for being part of this journey. Next time, we'll explore the emotional tools that help bring identity and values to life in everyday situations. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.